This is the Sony BRAVIA 8 II, Sony's new QD OLED flagship for 2025. It features the latest generation QD OLED panel, an upgraded XR processor, and a lower launch price than the model it replaces, but with tough competition this year, including from its own predecessor. Is this Sony's best OLED yet, and has it done enough to stand out? Let's find out. Now, despite the name, this isn't a refresh of the BRAVIA 8, Sony's mid-range OLED. In fact, that model still exists. This is actually the replacement for the A95L, Sony's top flagship OLED from the past 2 years. Confused? Yeah, we were too. Sony restructured their lineup last year and haven't really left much space for themselves to name new models. Their flagship mini LED is now the BRAVIA 9, and while many expected this new OLED to be called the BRAVIA 10, Sony were clearly reluctant to use that name. Maybe it's being reserved for a new RGB mini LED expected next year. Who knows? But for now, that left this model with the name BRAVIA 8 II. But just to be clear, this is Sony's new QD OLED flagship. Not mid-range, not a refresh, a full-on A95L replacement. Now, before we dive into the full review, here's the lowdown. The BRAVIA 8 II is not the brightest OLED this year. If brightness is at the top of your wish list, then there are a couple of brighter options. The Samsung S95F, LG G5, and Panasonic Z95B have pulled ahead on that front, and if you're in a bright sunlit space, then those are the models that I would be steering you guys towards. But brightness isn't everything, and in our real-world testing, the BRAVIA 8 II still ranks as one of the best OLED TVs this year for the right person, so let's find out if that's you. First up, pricing. Now, we've talked a lot on this channel about the Sony tax, and often these flagship reviews come with the question of whether the Sony is actually worth paying the extra for, but this year, we've got a very different story. The launch price for the Sony BRAVIA 8 II actually comes in quite a bit cheaper than the launch price for the A95L, and even more surprisingly, it's right in line with flagship OLEDs from the likes of Samsung and LG. Now, it is worth noting that this model is only available in two sizes, 55 inches and 65 inches, which is a shame, especially considering that the G5 now ranges from 48 inches all the way up to 97 inches, but Sony is continuing the A95L for now in the 77-inch version to help fill the gap. Design-wise, the BRAVIA 8 II looks very similar to the A95L that it replaces and keeps the same premium look and feel and solid build quality that we've come to expect from Sony. It features Sony's slim one-slate design with next to no bezel and a solid aluminium stand positioned at the outer edges. Now, you can raise the stand to fit a soundbar underneath, but there is no option to have a narrow stand, so you will need a fairly wide TV unit if you're not wall mounting it. The chassis is a bit thicker than some of its rivals, but that's largely down to the custom heatsink and actuator-based audio system built in here. Now, I will come back to talk about the audio later on in the video, but the heatsink helps manage panel temperature more effectively, especially in intense HDR scenes. Now, it also helps sustain brightness for longer, and it prevents burn-in over time. Back to the design, and I do want to talk about the remote for a minute. Now, I've always been a fan of the Sony remotes, but I will say that this version does feel like a bit of a step backwards. It's light and a bit plasticky, and it isn't backlit or rechargeable like the A95L remote. It's still a functional remote, it's just not quite as premium for me, which does feel like a shame. Under the hood, the BRAVIA 8 II is using the latest 3rd gen QD OLED panel from Samsung Display, the same panel you'll find in the Samsung S95F. Now, QD OLED uses a blue OLED light source and red and green quantum dots, which helps deliver purer color across all brightness levels. Sony have also added a custom heatsink, as I mentioned, and their latest XR processor, which has been upgraded for 2025 with a real focus on AI, a trend that we're seeing across pretty much all TV brands this year. Now, one new feature on this TV is AI scene recognition, which analyzes the content in real time and intelligently adjusts the picture to maintain realism. Now, in practice, it means that the TV is constantly optimizing the image to deliver what Sony calls studio calibrated accuracy. Now, speaking of calibration, the BRAVIA 8 II also has dedicated picture modes for Netflix, Prime Video, and Sony Picture Core for a more accurate image straight out of the box. Now, this TV runs on Google TV OS, which in my personal opinion is still the best TV operating system out there. It's clean, it's fast, and it makes it super easy to find your content or jump into the settings. And format support is what you'd expect from a Sony flagship. Dolby Vision, Dolby Atmos, IMAX Enhanced, HDR10 and HLG are all here. However, there is still no support for HDR10+, which is a common omission for Sony TVs. But as always, specs are one thing. If you've watched just one of our reviews before, then you'll know it's the real world test that we actually care about most. We want to know how this TV is really going to look and feel in a regular home environment, not just what the peak nits are in a lab test. Now, before I share our findings, we've compared these TVs based on their OOTB performance, sticking to the brand's preset picture modes. Now, we believe this is how the majority of people will actually use these TVs. So our goal here is to give you guys a taste of what you can actually expect in your own home. But that being said, if you choose to have the TV calibrated or if you do it yourself, your results may vary. And for those of you out there who really want a deeper dive, then check out the Value Electronics TV Shootout for a look at the top OLED models once they've been professionally calibrated. But if you're here for real world testing without the deep dive, then you're in the right place. So let's get to it. Now, we've tested the BRAVIA 8 II out with a wealth of content over the last few weeks, both right here in our darker film studio and upstairs in our light bright showroom. We've put it head to head with the A95L to see what's new, and we've also done some side-by-sides with the LG G5 and Samsung S95F for context. Now, we are still waiting for the Panasonic Z95B to land in our showroom for that comparison as well. Now, just to give you guys a bit of a heads up, we'll also have our very own flagship OLED showdown coming very soon to the channel with a proper battle for the top spot. So be sure to subscribe down below so you don't miss that video, as I'll dive a lot deeper in that one on the differences between all of the models. But back to the BRAVIA 8 II, and in terms of general viewing, I have to say this is a very, very solid performance from Sony. The TV offers superb out-of-the-box accuracy with vibrant but not overdone colours, great shadow detail, and an overall well-balanced cinematic picture. Motion has been great and image clarity is excellent. One of this TV's biggest strengths is how little effort it takes to get it looking good. You really don't need to spend ages faffing about with the settings to get a great picture. Now, standard mode for me is a bit on the cooler side, but the presets are there to help you find the look that you prefer. I've used professional for most of our testing, though cinema can sometimes give a bit more brightness if you feel that you need it. Panel uniformity has been excellent on our unit too. No signs of any visible banding or anything like that. And motion has also been very impressive on this one. In Dolby Vision, this TV is fantastic. Dolby Vision Dark works brilliantly in darker environments, and you can boost the brightness using Dolby Vision Bright if needed. The picture is vibrant, natural and well balanced with impressive highlights and strong contrast. It also retains detail really well, both in the brightest highlights and darker areas of the image, which is really not easy to do. In HDR content, it definitely holds its own, but as you'll see shortly, it does lack some of the punch that you get from the Samsung and LG flagships. SDR content is a bit more nuanced. Upscaling has always been a strong point for Sony, and this model is no different. Low resolution content looks clean and detailed, and it does a really good job of sharpening without introducing artifacts. However, we did notice in testing that the BRAVIA 8 II does feel noticeably flatter than expected, especially when compared to its HDR performance or even the previous A95L. We found the blacks to be lifted, almost appearing grey at times, and I'd say if SDR is a regular part of your viewing, then this might be a sticking point. Generally speaking, side by side with the A95L, the BRAVIA 8 II feels like more of a refinement than a serious upgrade. But that might say more about the achievements of the A95L than any shortcomings here. Sony has kept what we loved about the A95L. Accurate picture, very impressive upscaling, great off-axis viewing angles, and an overall well-balanced image, but there's no sense of a major upgrade in any one area. For Dolby Vision and HDR content, the two are very close indeed in performance, and in general day-to-day viewing, I really couldn't pick out much difference between them. If you're watching more critically, then you can spot the improved brightness on the BRAVIA 8 II, but you've really got to look for it. Now, Sony do claim a 25% step up in brightness, and while I'm not convinced that fully translates to real world viewing, you can find brighter highlights and significantly more vibrant colours, especially in high nit content. So how about versus the G5 and S95F then? Well, first things first, there is no denying that the Sony does fall behind the LG and Samsung for brightness, as I mentioned at the start of this video. The G5 features new tandem RGB OLED, a new 4-stack technology that drastically boosts brightness, making it the current leader for raw OLED punch. Now, I won't dive too deep here as we've got a full explainer video already on our channel if you want to learn more, but given the change in tech for the G5, I did expect it to outperform the BRAVIA 8.2 in this area. And I imagine that the Panasonic Z95B, which shares the same tandem RGB OLED panel, will be similar in terms of brightness. What surprised me more was the S95F. It's using the same latest gen QD OLED panel as the BRAVIA 8.2, yet it looks noticeably brighter. It seems that Sony's more reserved image tuning and less aggressive tone mapping give the BRAVIA 8.2 a very different feel. Now, as I said before, brightness really isn't everything, and the S95F at times can feel a little bit over-processed, with colours not looking as natural and blacks that do verge on crushing. The Sony retains an accurate picture, albeit not as bright or as punchy. Now, the Samsung is newer into the studio, and I do want to do some more testing before sharing my full verdict in our dedicated head-to-head. What I will say is that the BRAVIA 8.2 still looks great and plenty bright enough in a darker environment like this one here. For real-world viewing, I would personally bring the S95F and G5's brightness back a bit, as they are quite dazzling in this space. Now, when testing Dolby Vision content via the Apple TV, the S95F is out of the running as it doesn't support Dolby Vision. However, with the LG and Sony in their respective accurate modes, the gap also closes quite a bit. It's still clear that the G5 has more headroom. Specular highlights it brighter and it can reach higher peak nits, but the overall picture is a lot closer than I expected. It's really when you come out into the menus or bright UI elements that you get blasted by the G5's brightness and are reminded just how different they are. Now we've moved into our brighter showroom, and as you can see, this is a very bright space with windows opposite the TVs and plenty of skylights. A worst case scenario for OLEDs. And this is where we start to see that extra brightness really paying off for Samsung and LG. Now traditionally, we'd say OLED for darker rooms and LED for brighter spaces, but the G5 is changing that now. Even in this extreme test, LG holds its brightness really well. In contrast, the Sony starts to feel a bit flat. Now, I will say that most homes won't have quite this much ambient light, but if you do a lot of daytime viewing in a bright space, this could be an important comparison. You can see the blacks have been lifted on the Sony, taking away that signature OLED contrast and inky blacks. Reflections are handled well, better than the A95L I'd say, and it looks like there's been an update to the anti-reflective coating, though I can't help but think that could be to blame for the lifted blacks. So where do we stack up then when it comes to picture quality? Well, this is Sony's brightest OLED yet, albeit not a dramatic improvement, but a step up nonetheless. Sony haven't chased the wow factor like LG and Samsung have. Instead, they seem to have stuck to their mission for the most accurate and natural picture. The problem is that when you've got all of these TVs side by side like we have, the Sony can tend to be a little bit overlooked. It's not as immediately eye-catching, but I know there will be plenty of you guys out there, the purists, shall we say, who will appreciate the subtlety and precision of what Sony has done here. And I honestly do still think that when it comes to image processing and color accuracy, that Sony remains number one for now. Now, we don't usually spend too long on sound when it comes to top tier TVs, mostly because we'd recommend actually pairing them with a soundbar or home cinema system to match the visuals. And we've actually done a lot of our testing using the Sonos Arc Ultra soundbar. But the BRAVIA 8.2 does offer a better sound performance than most. It carries over the same acoustic Surface Audio Plus system from the A95L, with 2 actuators and 2 subwoofers behind the screen for a 2.2 channel speaker system. Now, the actuators vibrate the panel itself to produce sound, helping the audio to feel more aligned with the visuals on screen. Now, I'd still like more weight and oomph from the sound, but vocals are nice and clear, and it's an overall decent sound performance. When it comes to gaming, the BRAVIA 8.2 is great, not quite excellent. There's not a lot of change here from the A95L. You still get 4K at 120Hz, VRR, ALLM, and Dolby Vision game mode. Now, as it's a Sony, you also get perfect for PS5 functionality, and you can use remote play with other TVs in your home, which is really handy if you don't want to move your console between rooms. But there's still only two HDMI 2.1 ports, and one of those is your eARC port. So if you've got a soundbar and two games consoles, then you will be swapping cables. Now, it's not a deal breaker, but not ideal either. Also, 120Hz does feel like it's falling behind a little bit now. Many TVs actually offer 144Hz or even 165Hz. Either Sony is a step behind, or they're confident that most users won't actually need those extras. Now, in our real-world testing, this is still a great gaming TV. The visuals look sharp, colors are vibrant, and the motion is very smooth. Game mode does lower brightness, so it's not the brightest gaming experience, and the input lag is higher than some competitors, especially from LG and Samsung. I think if you're a casual gamer or primarily using a PS5, then this will offer a great gaming experience, but more competitive or PC gamers might prefer the specs on rival models. Now, we've covered a lot in this video, so where does all of this leave us? Well, the Sony BRAVIA 8 II is undeniably one of the best OLEDs out there, particularly for those who prioritize cinematic precision and natural accuracy over peak brightness and headline specs. While it's not perfect, its SDR performance is a bit flat, it's limited in screen sizes, and LG and Samsung have pulled ahead in some areas. But it's all about refinement and balance. For Dolby Vision content in dark rooms, it holds its own against the G5, delivering an impressive performance that's more about realism than raw brightness. So is the BRAVIA 8 II the right TV for you? Well, I think if you're after an OLED for well-lit rooms or the best TV for gaming, then it might not be your pick. But for those who want a more accurate, more cinematic experience in darker settings, then it definitely deserves a spot on your shortlist. The out-of-box performance is fantastic, and though the brightness gap is noticeable, the overall package makes it one of the top OLEDs of the year. It might not have taken a huge leap over the A95L, but for film purists, it still deserves a place on your shortlist. So hopefully you guys have enjoyed this video, and we have got plenty of TV content to come later in the year, so make sure you subscribe to stay right up to date and in the loop. Here are two more videos that I think you might enjoy. Thank you all very much for watching, and I'll catch all of you guys in the next video.